I want to tell you about the human. I want to tell you because I was wrong about him from the very first day, and I think most of the galaxy would have been wrong too. My name is Ryvak Thelsori. I am Valurian, which means I stand about 8 feet tall, have 4 arms, and come from a species that has not needed to raise a hand against another living creature in over 6,000 years. I was in my 3rd year at the Galactic Union Preparatory Institute on Station Athenor 7 when they told us a human was coming. Nobody was excited about it. You have to understand, humans had only been contacted 12 cycles earlier. They were new. They were primitive by galactic standards. They had not even left their own solar system without help. When the administration announced that a human exchange student would be joining our program, most of us treated it like a political gesture, a formality, something the Galactic Council approved to make themselves look open-minded. A few of the older students laughed about it openly. The Thesari students, the big reptilian ones with claws and armored scales, made jokes about babysitting. I was assigned as his orientation partner, which meant I had to meet him at the docking port on his first day. I remember standing there, waiting, trying to imagine what he would look like. I had studied the basic file on humans: 2 arms, 2 legs, no claws, no venom, no armor plating, no threat display mechanisms. Omnivores with flat teeth and soft skin. Average lifespan of about 80 solar cycles, which is honestly heartbreaking by galactic standards. Everything about their biology screamed prey animal. Then Marcus Cole walked off the transport shuttle, and I thought the file had been generous. He was short, not just by my standards, but by the standards of most species at the Academy. He had brown hair, brown eyes, a plain face, and a bag slung over one shoulder. He looked around the docking bay with a kind of quiet curiosity, not wide-eyed wonder, not fear, just calm interest. He saw me, smiled, and said hello. His voice was soft. His handshake, a human greeting custom, was firm but brief. He thanked me for meeting him. I walked him to his quarters and showed him the campus, and the entire time I kept thinking the same thing. He seemed almost designed to be overlooked. There was nothing remarkable about him at all. The first few weeks confirmed my impression. Marcus attended every class. He sat in the middle rows. He took notes carefully with a small electronic pad. He asked questions when he did not understand something, which was often, and he never seemed embarrassed about not knowing. He laughed at jokes even when I could tell he did not fully understand them. He was polite to everyone, even the students who were not polite to him, and some of them were not polite at all. A Thesari student named Draxus Kor shoulder-checked Marcus in the corridor during the 2nd week. It was not subtle. Draxus was 7 feet of scaled muscle and sharp teeth, the son of a military commander, and he had a habit of reminding smaller species where they stood. He hit Marcus hard enough to send his bag to the floor. Marcus picked it up, stepped to the side, nodded at Draxus, and kept walking. I watched this happen. I waited for some kind of reaction, a complaint, a flinch, anger, something. But Marcus just continued to his next class as if it had been a minor inconvenience, like bumping into a piece of furniture. I wrote in my journal that night that humans appeared to possess no fight instinct whatsoever. I described Marcus as docile, passive, and fundamentally harmless. I speculated that his species had survived on their homeworld through avoidance rather than confrontation. I felt a strange tenderness toward him, the kind you might feel for a small creature that had wandered into a place it did not belong. I was so completely wrong. The first crack in my understanding came during a xenobiology lab. Our instructor, a Dolmari physician with 4 eyes and an extremely analytical mind, was discussing pain tolerance thresholds across species. She asked students to share examples of injuries they had experienced. Most of us described minor incidents. A Korvan student talked about chipping a horn. A Phelan student described bruising a wing membrane. Marcus raised his hand and said he had broken his arm when he was 7 years old. He said he had fallen from something called a tree. Then he said, very casually, that he had walked a considerable distance to find his mother while holding his broken arm against his chest. The classroom went quiet. The instructor asked him to repeat what he had said. He did, looking confused by our reaction. The instructor blinked all 4 of her eyes in rapid sequence, which I knew was a sign of deep alarm in Dolmari. She asked Marcus how long the bone had taken to heal. He said about 6 weeks. She asked if it had healed correctly. He said yes, completely. as if this were a perfectly normal thing. I looked around the room. Every student was staring at him. In most galactic species, a broken bone is a catastrophic injury. Some species never recover from one. The idea of a child walking on his own with a fractured limb, and then having that limb repair itself naturally, was not just impressive, it was unsettling. The second crack came during physical kinetics class. We were doing endurance testing. Most species in the galaxy are built for short, powerful bursts of effort. Sprint, strike, retreat. That is the biological norm. Thesari students dominated the speed tests. A Korvan student won the strength assessment. Marcus finished near the bottom in every single category. Then we did the sustained effort test. It was simple. Move at a steady pace until your body forces you to stop. One by one, students dropped out. The Thesari burned through their energy reserves in minutes. The Korvan hit their thermal limit and had to stop before their organs overheated. Even the Dolmari, who are considered highly resilient, eventually reach their biological shutdown threshold. Every species has a built-in safety mechanism that forces them to stop before they damage themselves permanently. Marcus did not stop. He was sweating. His face was red, his breathing was rough and heavy, but he kept going. 5 minutes passed when the last student had stopped. Then 10, then 15. The instructor watched with an expression I had never seen on her face before. She eventually ordered him to stop. Marcus slowed down, wiped his face and asked, "Was that okay?" I went to the Academy's Xenodata archive that night and searched for everything I could find about humans. What I read kept me awake until morning. Persistence predation. Their ancestors hunted by following prey animals for hours, sometimes days, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. Adrenaline response. A chemical system that temporarily increases their speed, strength, and pain tolerance when they are threatened. Warfare. Thousands of years of organized conflict. Entire civilizations built around the science of fighting. They had a biological response called fight or flight, and unlike most species that lean toward one or the other, humans had both options fully developed and could switch between them at will. And then I read something that made me set down my pad and stare at the wall. The article said that among humans, the calm ones were often the most dangerous. Not because they lacked the capacity for aggression, but because they had already decided how they would respond to a threat long before the threat arrived. They were not passive, they were waiting. I looked at Marcus differently after that, but I told myself the data had to be exaggerated. Now I need to tell you about Lyriel. She was a Phelan, one of the smallest species at the Academy. Phelan are beautiful in a way that makes you want to protect them. They stand about 4 feet tall, with translucent skin that glows with soft bioluminescence, delicate wings they use more for expression than flight in standard gravity, and bones so hollow that a strong grip could fracture them. They have no natural defenses, none. Their entire evolutionary strategy was to be too small and too harmless to bother with. Draxus Core had decided to bother with her. It started small, blocking her path, making her flinch with sudden movements, standing too close and letting his size do the intimidating for him. Lyriel was terrified. Her light would dim whenever he was nearby, which is a Phelan stress response. She stopped speaking in class. She started eating alone. Marcus noticed. I watched Marcus notice. There was no dramatic moment, no announcement. He just started being near her, sitting next to her in lectures, walking with her between classes, helping her carry equipment that was too heavy for her hollow bones. He never said anything about what he was doing, he just did it. When Draxus approached one day in the corridor, Marcus was standing beside Lyriel. Draxus looked down at him and said, "Move away from the glowbug, primate, or I will show you where your species sits on the food chain." Marcus looked up at him. He did not step back. He did not raise his voice. He did not posture or puff up or display. He just said, very calmly, "I would rather not. I was there. I saw it." I had watched Thesari threat displays make entire classrooms full of students cower and look away. Marcus looked at Draxus, the way you might look at bad weather. He acknowledged it. He was not bothered by it. Draxus walked away, but I knew it was not over. It happened on a rest day during a galactic history lecture. The amphitheater classroom was full, more than 40 students, with our elderly Korvan professor speaking at the front. Draxus was seated directly behind Lyriel. He started making low clicking sounds, predator signals that triggered an involuntary fear response in most prey species. He flicked the back of her chair. He leaned in close. Lyriel was shaking. Her bioluminescence was flickering in distress patterns that even I could read as desperate fear. The professor either did not notice or did not want to get involved with a Thessari. Marcus was seated 2 rows away. I was watching him, because by that point I always watched him. I saw the moment his expression changed. It was not anger. It was not panic. It was something I had never seen in any species before. Every unnecessary process in him seemed to shut down at once. His face went still. His breathing slowed. His eyes locked onto Draxus and did not move. It was like watching a system reroute all its power to a single function. He spoke once. His voice was level and quiet. "Leave her alone." Draxus stood up, all 7 feet of him. His claws extended. His threat crest, the ridge of bone and cartilage along his skull, rose to full height. He let out a roar that triggered panic across the room. Students scrambled out of their seats. Some fled for the doors. Lyriel curled into a ball, her light almost completely out. Draxus swung at Marcus, and Marcus moved. He did not run. He did not retreat. He stepped forward, inside the arc of the swing, so close that the claws passed behind him without connecting. Then he struck Draxus in the throat with his closed fist. Not wildly, not desperately. With a precise, controlled motion that used the rotation of his entire body, Draxus staggered backward, his breath catching. What happened next lasted less than 10 seconds, but I will remember every moment for the rest of my life. Marcus did not have claws. He did not have venom or armored skin or superior size. What he had was something I had never seen in any creature before. He read every movement Draxus made before it happened. When Draxus lunged, Marcus was already not there. When Draxus swiped, Marcus was already inside his guard. One of the strikes grazed Marcus across the arm, tearing his uniform and drawing a thin line of red. Marcus did not even acknowledge it. His body was flooded with that chemical his species produces, that adrenaline, and instead of shutting him down, it made him faster and sharper. He took Draxus to the ground, using leverage and joint control, twisting the larger creature into a position his body was not designed to resist. He held him there, one arm locked, breathing hard, bleeding from the scratch on his arm, and he said nothing. He just held him. The room was completely silent. 40 students from a dozen species stood frozen, staring at the small, soft, clawless human who had just put the biggest predator in our academy on the floor, without using anything except his own 2 hands. Security arrived within minutes. Marcus released Draxus immediately. He raised his hands. He cooperated without a single word of protest. Draxus was escorted out. When the medical team reached Marcus and tried to treat the scratch on his arm, he shook his head and pointed at Lyriel. "Check on her first," he said. The Phelan girl was physically unharmed but in shock. When she looked at Marcus, her bioluminescence shifted to a pattern I had never seen before. A soft, steady, golden glow. I later learned it was a deep trust response that Phelan normally reserve only for family members. In the disciplinary review, Marcus was cleared completely. Every piece of evidence confirmed that Draxus had been the aggressor, but the detail that spread through the faculty like wildfire was something the combat analysis system flagged in the security footage. Marcus had used techniques consistent with years of formal training. Every strike, every hold, every movement was deliberate and controlled. And at no point, not once, did he use more force than necessary. The system determined that Marcus had the ability to cause serious permanent damage, and chose not to. He chose not to. My xenobiology instructor told me something privately, a few days later. She said, "The humans do not have claws or venom because they never needed them. They learned to make fists. They learned to fight the way we learn mathematics, as a discipline, a skill, something to be studied and practiced. And the most dangerous ones are the ones who have learned exactly when to stop." Marcus came back to class the next day with a small bandage on his arm, and the same quiet demeanor he had always carried. He sat next to Lyriel. He took notes. He laughed at jokes he did not fully understand. Nothing about him had changed on the surface, but everything had changed for the rest of us. Students who had ignored him before now gave him respectful nods in the hallway. The Thessari students avoided him entirely, and Lyriel, for the first time since she had arrived at the academy, stopped dimming her light around others. She glowed openly, softly, constantly, and she always glowed a little brighter when Marcus was nearby. I deleted my old journal entries about humans, all of them. I had described them as docile, passive, harmless. I had mistaken restraint for inability. I had looked at a creature who had chosen peace and assumed he was incapable of anything else. I asked Marcus once, weeks later, whether he had been afraid during the incident. He looked at me with those plain brown eyes and said, "The whole time." I have been thinking about that answer ever since. He was afraid, and he did it anyway. Not for himself. For a small, glowing girl who could not protect herself. He was afraid, and he stepped forward, and he did what needed to be done, and then he stopped the very moment it was no longer necessary. I am told the humans have a word for that. They call it courage. And I am beginning to think it might be the most extraordinary thing in the entire galaxy.